In August of 2024, a brand new Axis and Allies game premiered at Gen Con when Renegade Game Studios introduced us all to Axis and Allies North Africa. Along with 2 full days worth of demos, they teamed up with event organizer Greg Smorey to host the first North Africa tournament, and Board Game Nation was there to capture the action of the final match. Today, we're going to give you a full blow-by-blow of this incredible game. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. We are thrilled to be back with a whole new season of championship tabletop board game action. Over the next few months, we'll be bringing you loads of Axis and Allies games, including the final of the 1942 Second Edition Tournament, the final of the Global Tournament, and 4 matches of the Axis and Allies World Championship featuring the Anniversary Edition. We'll also be bringing you coverage of one of my other favorite games, Diplomacy. We teamed up with Thomas Haver and captured live action footage of the U.S. National Championships. We hope that you'll join us for that. But today we're starting with a game that everyone's talking about, the brand new Axis and Allies North Africa. We recently released a full how to play / rulebook companion guide for this game. While you don't have to watch that video before you watch this one, if you've got questions about the rules, follow the link in the description or the card above to check that out. Before we dive into the game, a few things to keep in mind. Because this is tournament play, games have to end at a specific time. This can require a set of rules that can be very different than the rules that come in the box. You can find all the details linked in the description, but here are the highlights. For tournament play, we'll be using the Operation Torch scenario and all of the rules laid out in the rulebook for that. Operation Torch starts the game in round 7 with the arrival of the Americans, skips the Germans' first turn, and has several purchase and placement restrictions that are designed to further the historical accuracy of that scenario. Now, here are the key differences that are introduced by the tournament rules. The Axis losing Tunis, of course, would be bad, but it is no longer an instant win for the Allies. The Atlantic Convoy Zone has been eliminated. Units may be deployed directly into the Indian Ocean Convoy Zone and advance from there as normal. Players will bid for sides, offering increased numbers of reinforcement points to their opponents to play the undesired side. Once a bid is established, the side accepting the bid will be able to place units with some restrictions equal to the agreed value on the map prior to the start of the game. For all of the tournament bidding rules, check out the link in the description. Lastly, and most importantly, the win conditions are very different. Here's how a player will win according to this year's tournament rules. At the end of the last full round of play, completing the US's turn, and within the tournament game time limit, the Allies must control at least 3 of these territories: Tunis, Mareth, Tripoli, Kasserine Pass, El Agheila, and/or Benghazi. If they don't, the Axis win. So the Allies have to be controlling at least 3 of those cities when the time expires to take home the hardware. Now, we're excited to share this event with the community because lots of people are interested in learning more about this game, but something to keep in mind. This game that we're about to watch was played at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, August 4th, 2024. The game had yet to be released to the public, meaning that the guys that played in this tournament, they learned this game at a quick demo only a day or 2 before. They didn't have access to the 38-page rulebook or any how-to-play videos or anything like that. And considering that the rulebook is 38 pages long, it's fair to say that this game has a lot of deep complexity. Now, one of the game's designers, Matt Hyro, was actually there for a big chunk of this game to help them along, but as we go through this game, please remember everyone was still just learning. Even now, 3 months later, most people are still trying to get a full handle on the rules, let alone reaching for any kind of deep strategy. Now, I look forward to the comments and the discussion about these strategies and tactics for this game as everyone learns from the strong choices and other outright mistakes that we see in this game. Also, this was my first crack at rebuilding a game in the studio based just on video taken on site. So, of course, there's no way I got everything right, and I appreciate your indulgence as we work through this. Still, any errors that I made along the way wouldn't have had any significant difference on the outcome of the game. Also, I should say that I do my best with the pronunciations of the territories, but I'm going to go ahead and apologize now, upfront in advance, to the citizens of any city or territory whose name I undoubtedly will butcher. And of course, I couldn't do this without my fellow 2023 Axis and Allies World Champion, Mr. Doug Thorpe. Now, he hasn't had a chance to play this game yet, but he has watched all of our How to Play video and is eager to see the game in action. And I should say I haven't played it a lot either, but as you can imagine, I've spent a lot of time focused on the rules. So I'm sure that Doug's going to have a lot of rules questions along the way, as well as some strategic and tactical thoughts that I hope everyone will find helpful. So without any further ado, please welcome my dear friend, Mr. Doug Thorpe.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, Gary.
So again, Doug has seen the how to play video, and so this will be the first time that he's seen this. I think he walked past the table a couple of times at Gen Con, so you're like, it's not completely foreign, but this is not a setup that you're really particularly familiar with. Is that right?
Correct. Pretty foreign.
All right, cool. The tournament rules seem to have skewed pretty heavily in the Axis's favor. At least that was the feeling of all of the players that had played in the tournament. The majority of the earlier events were won by the Axis. So the bid here got a little out of control.
What were the bids in the prior games? Do you know approximately?
What I heard in the earlier games was that the bids were anywhere from 3 to 6. I think one was 8 to the Allies. The bid in this game came in at 14 to the Allies.
Wow. Okay.
Which is a lot. There's no doubt. And they made very good use of it, I think. They put the destroyer in 31, joining the battleship and the sub that are already there. They put the AA gun in Malta, which is a really, really good spot for it. And then the last thing that they did was they put another American infantry in Oran. The next thing that happens during the setup process is the UK gets to decide what they want their variable reinforcement points to be. So how do the UK want to spend their 24 variable reinforcement points? Well, the tournament rules say that they all have to go into the Indian Ocean convoy zone. So they picked up 2 infantry, 2 artillery, and 2 Matilda tanks. Matilda tanks are worth 5 in this game, so that's a total of 24 RPs. Now that they've placed their variable reinforcement points, we put the 2 Shermans up in the Suez Canal, and then we get ready to advance. So the Sherman tank moves in from the Suez, and then the Indian Ocean moves up to the Suez. So those are ready to come in on the next turn. So at this point, Cairo is full. It's got 13 combat units in it. Remember, trucks don't count towards the stacking limits. The UK has to spend 1 supply from Malta in order to get that extra 15 RPs, and they elected to do that. For their purchases, they've decided to lean into their naval advantage that have already started with the destroyer in 31, and they've bought a battleship, another destroyer, a fighter, 2 sea mines, and a 5 supply token. Now, one thing that's important here is that the 2 sea mines deploy immediately. They don't wait until the end of the turn. They go out right away. They did something illegal here. They moved both sea mines into Sea Zone 2 in the same turn. The rule says that you can place as many sea mines as you want in a turn, but you can only place 1 sea mine per sea zone per turn. So they could have put 1 in Sea Zone 3 and 1 in Sea Zone 2. That would have been fine, but they did put both of them into Sea Zone 2, which was not entirely correct. Which takes us to the first combat of the game. The fighter and the bomber from Malta jump out and attack the fighter and the bomber in Sicily. The other combat move that they had was to basically move the entire stack from Cairo to Mersa Matruh, or try to. They can attack with as many units as can reach, but only 8 of them would be able to enter because that's the stacking limit of that space, assuming that they're victorious. This I thought was an odd choice. I didn't love this one, but this is what they did. So they sent the scout car from Siwa into Burhashim with the bomber. The idea being that the Italian is going to have to defend. If he chooses to defend, he's going to have to spend a supply from either Benghazi or Tobruk. If he doesn't, then the attackers get to roll at him for free, and he doesn't shoot back. If he survives, he escapes essentially to Tobruk or Benghazi, or to any other neutral territory that just as long as it doesn't have enemy combat units in it. So the thing is that the scout car and the bomber both have an ability that forces the opponent to destroy a supply, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the better move, if you're going to go after their supplies, is because that scout car's got a movement of 4, it can go from Siwa to Halo to Mersa Brega and then use its last movement point to attack Benghazi. And the bomber has got a movement of 6, so it can make it from Cairo to Benghazi and back. That would force the Italian to, if it wants to take a shot at the scout car or the bomber, it has to spend a supply. And then it also loses 1 to the supply raider ability of the scout car and the collateral damage ability of the bomber.
Yeah. You can get rid of 3 supply.
Very, very quickly. Yes. So to me, that's the better move here. But this is what they did. And they also sent all 13 land combat units, or they sent 11 land combat units from Cairo into and the fighter into Mersa Matruh. So they had to spend 3 supplies in order to do that. I probably would have just gone with 10 to save the supply because you've got pretty good odds here already. But this is they spent the extra supply to send the extra guy. They did fire that mine, and they got 1 hit. Of course, the UK took the hit on the infantry. This doesn't remove it from play. It just removes it from this combat. So it's basically in timeout for the rest of this combat sequence, and it can't move during non-combat. And then they removed the mine, which then I believe made it so that all of our combat was set and ready to go. The outcome in Sicily was success for the UK. They eliminated the bomber and the fighter, but lost their fighter in the exchange. One thing to keep in mind in this game is that bombers and fighters cost the same. So there are times when it is better to lose the bomber.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of them, because the trick now is to try to defend Malta, and that bomber is not going to be good at that.
That's just what I was thinking. Keep the fighter and defend Malta.
Right. So this was a choice that I think, as people get more experienced at it, I think you'll see that more and more. You'll see the fighter surviving here rather than the bomber. To Bur Hashem, he did not opt to defend. He tried to retreat, but was killed in the attempt. So he died, but they did not spend a supply to do it. Okay. So that leaves, now what's important here is that the scout car is still in Siwa, right? It spent a movement point to declare the attack, but that doesn't cause it to move into the space. So now over to Cairo versus Mersa Matruh. They announced their attack. They spent the 3 supplies. They hit the mine, but then the Axis decided to bug out.
Okay.
So they're going to make a run for it. Now, they cannot evacuate to Siwa because there's an enemy unit there. They can't evacuate to Bur Hashem because it was under attack by a combat land unit. So they have to go to Tobruk. So now what happens is all of these allied units get to fire at will at the retreating Axis units, and they'll get to assign those casualties. And then anybody that survives evacuates to Tobruk. So they lost 1 guy. In all of that, they only took 1 hit.
Wow.
Pretty lucky.
That was a brilliant move. Brilliant tactical move on their part.
Absolutely. So they do successfully get everybody over to Tobruk, which is good. They've 9 guys in there. You can see that there's a stacking limit of 10. Again, the truck doesn't count. Notice that that's a UK truck that's captured. Italy has full control of it, but it is a captured UK truck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so now that they've evacuated the area, it is time for the UK to move in up to 8 units. They have to attempt to move in everybody that was part of the final round of combat up to 8. So they couldn't just now send 1 guy forward. If you sent 13 guys and it'll only hold 8, then you've got to send in 8. Okay, so, and again, the fighter doesn't count here because it won't be ending, it won't be landing there at the end of the turn. It'd be a pretty tough attack for the Axis to counter-strike here because they don't really have enough.
Yeah, they got a couple armor and a bunch of infantry, but Germany doesn't have hardly anything. AA guns and a tank.
So careful here. This again, this is tricky because that sculpt for what you just called the AA gun looks a lot like the AA gun from Revised, but it's actually the German anti-tank gun.
Oh, both of those are anti-tank guns.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the German anti-tank guns do have the air defense ability.
Yeah.
But they also have the targeted tank ability.
Yep.
In the first round of combat. Both of those in the first round of combat. So now, non-combat, the air units make it back to Cairo. They do opt to use a movement point to move the scout car into Bur Hashem.
The invisible scout car.
Yes, the invisible scout car. I don't know how I felt about that. I think
the only practical reason I could think of is they're just trying to get them to chase it and fan themselves out, like thin themselves out, so Britain can pick them off.
Yeah. The bomber comes back from Sicily, lands in Malta. And now it's time to place the remainder of our units. They place the fighter in the Malta convoy zone here, and the supply token in Gibraltar, the battleship and the destroyer into Sea Zone 3. I like the battleship and the destroyer in Sea Zone 3, of course. The alternative is to put it all the way back in the Indian Ocean convoy zone. It would take forever to get into play. This is absolutely, if the British are buying sea units, they should be going into Sea Zone 3. I don't see a good reason for them to make the loop from London all the way around Africa and come up in Sea Zone 31. But so they did that exactly right. I will say I don't love the fighter landing in Malta because it's not defending anything. In total, these were the losses for that particular round. Obviously, pretty strong for the Allies here.
It looks like the Allies have a plan. They're sticking to it, which is good. I agree. The fighter in the multi-convoy zone, Sea Zone 12, seems a little bit strange, but I've never played this game, and who am I to say? So maybe they got a good strat for it.
The fleet from 31 during their non-combat move moved to 24.
There was a brief mention in the how to play about there being a naval port in Cairo, and I see the anchor symbol there. Does that function in any way like the naval bases in Global, where it gives you 3 movement? I know you can repair your battleship there, but does it extend the movement of those pieces on their first move?
No. So the only function that seaport has is to repair the UK battleship. And that's the only place that the UK battleship can be repaired. All of the sea units in this game have a movement of 4. Now, they only opted to move 2 this time because they didn't want to get in the range of some of the other Axis air units. Once they get here, the only thing that can hit them is the sea units that are in 16. But what's important is that from 24, they can reach the Tripoli convoy zone, they can reach the Benghazi convoy zone, and they can reach the Malta convoy zone. Yeah. So I like the move to 24 here because it gives them the most options with the least amount of exposure.
Yeah. That makes sense.
At Board Game Nation, we work to foster an environment where gamers and enthusiasts of all stripes feel welcome. That's why when BetterHelp reached out to be the sponsor of this video, I knew it was a no-brainer. BetterHelp creates a safe and convenient space for you to talk to a therapist from the comfort of your, well, just about anywhere. BetterHelp will match you with a licensed therapist based on your therapy needs. If you don't feel that your therapist is the right fit, no worries. You can switch therapists anytime to find a provider that's a good match for you. Some of the unique features of BetterHelp that I really like are their therapist chat functions, group therapy to target specific needs, and their online journal. They even have therapists that specialize in working with veterans. Now, when it comes to seeking this kind of help, a big hurdle that so many of us face is cost. BetterHelp is already an affordable online solution, but BGN would also like to help. If you think you could benefit from a therapy session, click the link in the description or the pinned comment or visit betterhelp.com/boardgamenation to get 10% off your first month of therapy. All right, back to the game. All right, on to the Italians. They start with nothing to advance. They've got nothing in any of their convoy zones. So we jump right to their purchase reinforcements. They bought 2 subs, a truck, a supply token, and a bomber, which I thought was a good opener. I might have gone with the fighter rather than the bomber here so that you can put the fighter in to defend the convoy zone. The bomber's not going to be really good for that, but this is where they decided to go. For combat, they did send the bomber from Sardinia into Malta to face the bomber and the AA gun that are there. They sent the destroyer from 16. They decided to ignore the British fleet, which I think was the right move. They sent the destroyer into the Malta convoy to try to pick off the fighter. It's the more valuable unit. It's going to be harder to kill once it gets onto Malta. So I thought both of those things made sense to me. Here in the Eastern Front, they did nothing. They didn't attack anything. They had 3 infantry, 2 tanks, and enough supplies that they could have they certainly could have picked off the scout car, but they opted not to do anything here. As far as outcomes for them, it did not go great in Malta. One thing really rule kind of nugget here, air defense fires first.
Yeah.
Right? So this AA gun shot down the bomber as it came in. So it did not get to use its supply raider ability.
Yeah.
No, it didn't get to use its collateral damage ability, excuse me. And air units and AA guns do not require supplies to defend. So they basically shot down that bomber for free.
Wow. What do you hit on in this? Is it two or less?
2 and 1.
Man, they look like geniuses from putting that AA gun in there.
So AAs are a little bit stronger here, and they are less expensive. So they only cost 3 here, and they hit better. So, and it absolutely paid off in this particular circumstance because they shot down that bomber and did not have to lose the supply, which was pretty cool. That's pretty clutch. Not so much luck in the Malta convoy zone. They end up having to push. The destroyer did successfully take down the fighter, but the fighter returned fire and also destroyed the destroyer. Which takes us to our battle totals here. I basically stacked everything in Spain to take these pictures, so I might refer to fatalities as going to Spain, because that's kind of how I was thinking about it as I put this back together. So this is a loss of 18 versus a loss of 10. Again, a pretty good exchange for the Allies. Non-combat, they evacuate Tobruk and move everything, including the supplies, into Benghazi. That puts them there with 4 infantry, 2 tanks, and 7 supply. The sub from 16 moves over into 11. And now in the middle of the board here, they consolidated everything in Sirte. After they did that, they called it a day, and then it was time to deploy their reinforcements. They did put the new bomber into Sardinia. The supply and the truck, all by their lonesomes, in the Tripoli convoy zone, which is, as we mentioned before, in striking range of the British units in 24.
The collateral damage bomber.
So, important to remember, collateral damage only works in land combat. It doesn't work.
Okay. Yeah.
So, it will be able to attack. And remember, in convoy zones, each 5 supplies is 1 unit of cargo.
Yeah.
So all they have to do is hit the Tripoli convoy zone once to destroy both of those pieces, because the defender will choose one to die, and then the attacker will choose a unit type. And in this case, they would say truck, or they would say supply, whichever one the opponent didn't take. And then both of those things would be down to the bottom of the depths in the Mediterranean.
Questionable decision.
Yeah, that was tough. The Americans have got a bunch of money, as they do. They start with the 36 reinforcement points from their basic income. They bought 3 infantry, an artillery, a tank, 2 trucks, 5 supply. Remember that, 5 supply, a destroyer, and then a sea mine of their own. That sea mine, I thought this was pretty clever. You can place a sea mine into any sea zone that does not have enemy warships in it. Right? So even if it has air units or transports in it, you can still place your sea mine there, so long as it doesn't have any ships in it. So I thought this was a pretty clever spot. So they dropped it in 8.
I like it.
Right. And then they commenced their attack. And were successful here. They did go a couple of rounds of combat more than they wanted to. Again, remember the way that this works is that they're Vichy French until the French have a round of combat where they score no hits. And as soon as that happens, they give up the ghost and switch sides, and that's the end of the combat. But you do have to continue combat until that happens. That's really the expensive part here, is the cost and supplies for repeated rounds of combat.
Yeah.
So that's what happened in Casablanca. In Oran, they had the perfect outcome. All the Americans missed, all the French missed, and then they sat around and ate baguettes. It was very first round of combat, so they didn't have to lose any additional resources for it. Over in Algiers, it went on for a long time. And eventually the Allies killed all the Vichy French, but it did cost them 2 of their British units. I would have lost the Americans here because I think it's important to have the ability to do the 1-2 punch, let the English come in and then the Americans. So I think it would have been better to lose the American troops here than the British troops, but that's what they did. They also cleverly did draw some of the resources that they needed from Oran. So they drew the supplies from Oran to continue this battle so that their resources would stay closer to the front. I thought that was actually pretty well thought out.
Now, I know those French come over, but do they move in unison with either of the countries? I don't remember that point.
Yes, so now they are under the complete control of the Americans. They move with the Americans. They attack with the Americans. The Americans will pay for, they'll have to make sure that they're supplied if they send them into attack, stuff like that. If the Americans want to purchase more of the Free French, which they will in this game, they will buy them during their requisition reinforcements phase, and they'll be deployed into Iran. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So now it's time to place all of their goodies. In round 7, if the Americans control the Casablanca convoy zone, because they control Casablanca, they must deploy everything into the Casablanca convoy zone. So this is the map at the end of round 7. I think that it's still pretty even. Obviously, the Axis are moving back away from the Eastern Front, trying to kind of consolidate, I guess. I'm not sure where they're going to make their stand. Honestly, the best place for them to make a stand would have been in Tobruk, because land defenders in Tobruk reroll the 9 or 10s on the defense.
Oh wow!
Right. So this is a better spot, really. If you're gonna make a stand, you want to probably do it in Tobruk.
I think the Vichy French becoming Free French and being Americans ultimately furthers your point about they should have lost the American troops in Algiers and not the British troops, because they have all of these guys in the convoy zone plus all of these French troops. So right. I agree. I think it's a great observation.
And they can buy more French troops. They can buy more American troops, right? You know how hard it would be to get UK troops to Algiers? Now the British can deploy to the Oran convoy zone or the Algiers convoy zone, but it's harder to do, right? Because you've got this eastern push that you're trying to make. And the Americans can't really help you at all on this eastern front. On to the Germans. So the Germans, they start with 45 reinforcement points to get the game started, which is a lot in this game.
Yeah, it seems like a ton.
Right. And these are the units that they've got in Tobruk, and this is where they are in the western side of the map. So first step is to advance their convoys. They move their guys in along with the supplies. Okay, so they bought 3 subs, 2 sea mines, 5 supplies, and 2 fighters. German subs are elite subs, so they deploy immediately in phase 2 and can then make a combat move in phase 3. You can see that the Allied player was aware of this rule and is planned accordingly, which is why they've got mines and destroyers and things in place to try to mitigate this particular strategy. I will say the very first time that I played this game, I had forgotten about that and didn't buy the destroyer, didn't have any mines there, and they bought those 3 subs, they dropped them, and completely sank the Americans' first big purchase.
Oh, it'd be brutal.
Yeah, it was not great. So they placed the sea mines into Sea Zone 6, where there isn't anything right now, and then they added one to Sea Zone 8. On to combat, they take their air units, and they decide to take another swipe at the guys in Malta. Again, they've got just the bomber and the AA gun here because the fighter was destroyed earlier. Even if it hadn't been, it still would just be sitting in the Malta convoy zone at this point. It wouldn't be in Malta. So they decide to attack the Americans with those 3 subs. The first thing that has to happen here is they've got to deal with these mines. The UK player gets to decide whether or not they want to detonate these mines or not. They opt to detonate them, and both of them hit.
Oh.
Leaving 1 destroyer versus 1 sub. The sub fires at a 4 in this game. Unfortunately, it missed. The destroyer fired back at a 4, and it hit. And that was the end of the German sub.
That's brutal.
In this instance, it went a lot better for the Germans. They did lose the fighter because the bomber hit back, which was kind of amazing. The bomber only hits at a 1, and it hit. So that was, again, extraordinary luck for the Allied players. But the German Stutka bomber does have the collateral damage ability, so it did cost them 1 supply from the bomber. Not to defend, but from the bomber.
Bombers in this one are worse than other Axis and Allies games at defense.
Yes. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But that collateral damage ability is brutal.
Strong.
They lost 28 RPs worth of stuff this time, and the UK lost 13.
They didn't need that fighter after all. That bomber defended on his 1 just as well. Like, they didn't need that fighter. Why keep a fighter, man? Bomber does the job.
Clearly. So they move all of the guys from Tunis, everyone except for the scout car, from Tunis into the Kasserine Pass. in an attempt to put pressure on Algiers, and it is a significant amount of pressure. The bomber moves from Malta back to Tunis. The scout car used the coast road ability to go from Tunis to El Agheila to try to bolster the evacuation, apparently, of the eastern front here. From Tobruk, they evacuated Tobruk entirely and moved everything into Benghazi. But they did use the second movement of the tank and the mech to go through Benghazi and into Mersa Brega. Now it's time to place the rest of their units. They've got the 2 fighters and the supply token. They decide to add those to the Tripoli convoy zone. So now they've got 10 supplies there, a truck, and 2 fighters to defend against, I guess what can reach now is really just the units from 24, because there aren't any more air units in Malta. So it's looking a little better. At the end of the Germans' turn, they've got pretty good control over the Kasserine Pass. They've got a lot of pressure on Algiers right now, and they're still steadily moving west out of the eastern front. But they've got a pretty good chunk of supplies and a couple of fighters and are hopefully going to make it in from the Tripoli convoy zone. Any thoughts on that?
I didn't see just still getting used to the game. The placement of the fighters in the Tripoli convoy zone makes sense. I just assumed that they were leaving Italy out there to lose their truck and supplies, but forgetting that you can place other stuff in there. So that's a good reminder. It is interesting that they're pulling back to the west so much. I don't know if there's something to that or if they're planning on eventually trying to get stuff into Benghazi, but it does seem like they're retreating, which doesn't necessarily seem the best idea.
On to the UK. It is time for them to advance their convoy. They move the guys in from the Suez Canal into Cairo. That gives them less than 13 there, so they got plenty of space left in there. They decide to purchase 2 fighters, a supply, a sea mine, 2 infantry, and a Matilda tank. They place the sea mine into Sea Zone 6. So all of this will have to go out in Phase 6. For combat, they're going after them. So they send the fleet in its entirety over to Sea Zone 13 to try to take out all the goodies that are there. So they've got a battleship, a destroyer, and a sub versus 2 fighters, a truck, 10 supply, and a sea mine.
What are the numbers on the attack and defense in that situation? I'm very curious what the battleship and the fighters all, attack and defend at.
The battleship attacks and defends at a 6, takes 2 hits to destroy. The destroyers attack and defend at a 4. The sub attacks at a 4, defends at a 2. The German fighters are going to defend at a 5.
So basically 6 and a 4 against 2 5s as far as the actual fighting itself. Pretty even odds.
But the sub is still going to fire here.
Yeah, it just can't hit the airplanes. It'll hit but it can hit the transports, right? I think it's a smart attack on Britain's part.
Totally. In this instance, they decide to repeat their attack that they had on Berhashem, except now they're going to go after the tank and the mech that's in Mersa Brega. So they send the bomber and the scout car. Again, that supply token is just pulled from the supply off the table. That doesn't have to come from anybody, but you want the attack arrow so that you can see what's going on.
Got it.
The Germans now have to choose whether or not they're going to try to defend this thing. And to do it, they've got to spend a supply out of Benghazi. They also take a pretty good stack from Mersa Matruh, along with the Shermans coming from Cairo into Tobruk. That's a combat move, of course, because it's a hostile territory. So those are all of the combat moves for the UK. So how did it go in the Tripoli convoy zone? They rolled for the mine and they missed. And in the end, both fighters were destroyed. The Italian supply and truck were destroyed. And they scored 1 hit in return, which got soaked onto the battleship. So now the battleship is damaged, doesn't repair unless it can make it all the way back to Sea Zone 31. So it's a damaged battleship.
Yeah.
Pretty good round for the Allies in that particular battle there. They probably should have also lost the destroyer, but they made a pretty clean sweep of it. In Mersa Brega, they did opt to defend and spent the supply from Benghazi. And in the return fire, they did kill the scout car.
Looks like the British move worked there. I mean, you get rid of the supply and the 2 German units for the scout car. I'll take that trade any day.
Every day of the week. Absolutely. And of course, they took Tobruk because it was undefended.
Real quick, is there any advantage to not moving the Matildas in that battle? I mean, I guess if you want to non-com them somewhere, but they could have gone in because the limit is 10, right?
Right. The Matildas do only move one, but they do have the Coast Road ability. So in the right circumstance, they can still move up to 5. So let's see what they did for non-combat here. They sent the 3 Matildas from Mersa Matruh into Berhashim, and then the 2 that came from Cairo, they moved those up to Tobruk using the Coast Road. Now they've activated the truck. They had 2 trucks back here. They used the first one to grab the 5 supply token and the guy and move that to Tobruk. The second one, they load up with 2 infantry, 2 artillery, 2 supply, and they moved that to Berhashim, which I think was interesting. So where does that leave us from a stacking limit point of view? So they've got a full Tobruk, and they've got 7 units in Berhashim, which means that they've got 17 units that could go to Benghazi if they wanted to. And there's no way that the Axis could defend.
Yeah, they're in a tight spot there.
Yeah. Non-combat, the air units make it back to Cairo. In the end, the Axis lost a bunch, and the Allies didn't really lose anything.
That's
what is that, 22, 25? The 5 supply token costs 3. So 25, I almost said IPCs. 25 RPs for the Axis lost, Allies lose 0. Other non-combat, they move the battleship and the destroyer up to Sea Zone 6, which triggered the sea mine there, gave the Germans the option to blow it up. They decided to try, and unfortunately, they missed. Takes us to the deployment of the rest of the UK units. They've got the 2 fighters, the supply, and the rest of the combat land units. They sent the 2 fighters into Algiers, and they put the rest in the Indian Ocean convoy zone. So one of the other things that you can do, and this is something that a lot of people seems to be missing, is that you can deploy from your staging zone to any of your open convoy zones in phase 6, right? So they did something pretty clever here, and I really like this strategy. They took the 5 supply token that they had in the last round. They broke it into 5 individuals. They sent 1 to the Malta convoy zone because they only need 1 in Malta to be able to do their thing. And the more you put these in here, the more they've got to come after them. And there's no guarantee that they're going to hit it. And after the first round of combat, the defender gets to escape a unit of cargo. Yeah. So they just escape the supply. If it can survive 1 round of dice, they escape the supply and it makes it to Malta. Yeah. So they think this is a really good strategy for this. Now, if they wanted to, the Germans could detonate these sea mines. Now, in this particular instance, they didn't do it. And I don't blame them. You're trying to kill 1 supply. But in theory, you're going to be able to take them out from, with some other unit. I thought that was a really good move by the UK.
Yeah. Now, could they send more? They could send some of that supply to either the Iran or Algiers convoy zone to move inland and then allow the U.S. to use it, right?
Right. So it would move, on this turn, it would move to either Iran or Algiers convoy zones. And then on the UK's next turn, it would advance in phase 1, and then either allied power could use it. Over to the Italians. Unfortunately, the Italians do not have anything to advance because their truck and their supply were destroyed. So now it is time to make their purchase. They decide it's time to turtle, essentially, and which I think is pretty early in the game to make that choice. They purchase 8 infantry, 1 supply, 2 landmines, and 1 sea mine. And their thinking here was that the supply would be there so that it could take a hit. Because 1 supply only costs 1, the Italian guys cost 2. So the idea was that this was an economical purchase. Place the sea mine into Sea Zone 8, the landmine on the border between Tripoli and Sirte, and the other one on the border between El Agheila and Mersa Brega, which leaves these units to deploy in phase 6. Time for combat. They decide to go after the units that are in 6. So they've got 3 subs and a bomber versus the battleship, a destroyer, and 2 fighters. And there's a sea mine there, so they're going to have a shot at that. But I don't love this move because I'm not sure what you're trying to gain, right? Like, there's a battle for sea dominance that's happening, for sure, but there's got to be a carrot at the end of that.
Yeah, even if you wipe them out, I feel like you've only gained so much. I mean, I guess if Germany goes more Navy, you can put the pinch on the United States over there. But Britain has a distinct advantage. You have 3 4s against effectively 1 4 and 2 5s, with the sixes being a wash, and the 1 6 has the battleship has a soak, and that doesn't even count the landmine.
So the other thing to remember, you talked about the Germans going heavier into the Navy. The maximum that the Germans can do here is purchase 3 subs. That's all they'll ever be able to buy. They don't have destroyers or battleships or anything like that. The only thing they can ever buy are those 3 elite subs that spring up out of Sea Zone 1. I think sea dominance would be very difficult for the Axis to maintain here.
Yep, that makes sense.
So how to go for the old Italian move here in 6? They missed with the landmine, or they missed with the sea mine, and as expected, I think this is probably pretty close to what the math might have turned out to be. This was kind of their advantage, right? So they end with the damaged battleship and the fighter, and that is about what you would expect to see out of that battle. So how to go? What are we doing over here? The Italians are making a run for it. So they move the tanks in from El Agheila. They move the guys in from Sirta into El Agheila. So it looks like we're planning to make the stand in El Agheila. Okay, I can appreciate that. The guys move from Tripoli over to Sirta, and then they load up the truck with the 3 remaining supplies that are there, and then the 3 infantry, and they book it out of Benghazi and over to El Agheila, which takes them to their max of 10 units there, and 3 supply. Plus the truck is there if they need to pop over to Tripoli to pick up more supplies.
Yeah, that's not shocking given the placement of their landmines. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, they were definitely outnumbered in Benghazi, so maybe you can't hold that. It seems pretty passive. They've only been retreating on this front, but I don't know what else to do. Britain's had the upper hand a lot, so
they deploy into the Tunis convoy zone with their 8 infantry and their supply, and the only defense for them right now are the 3 sea mines. Remember that deploying into a convoy zone that has a sea mine in it triggers that sea mine. So the Americans now have the option to detonate this mine if they want to. They want to, and it hits successfully. They opt to remove one of the infantry and then the supply. In the end, another stellar round for the Allies here. They lose 18 IPCs worth of material versus 31, excuse me. Because the Italian infantry only cost 2 in this game.
Yeah, that's tough.
So this is what we look like at the end of the Italians' turn in the Eastern Front. Again, just kind of falling back, and looks like they're getting ready to make a stand in El Agheila. We'll see what happens. And the Western Front, the Italians are not here at all, other than a control marker in Mareth and the stack that's hoping to make it into Tunis on their next turn, but they're kind of out there naked at the moment. So as we look at the Americans, we can see that they've got a bunch of guys that are about to land in Casablanca, but they're looking a little thin in Algiers at the moment. So let's see what they decide to do. They advance their convoy and then make their purchase. And here's what they buy. They buy a French tank, which I think is a great purchase. They're cheap, and they are 3 3s.
Okay.
Which is good. And they deploy immediately into Oran.
Oh, that's really good.
Right. Now, they do only move 1, but for 4, they defend at a 3, they attack at a 3, and really important, they're self-sufficient, so they don't require supplies to defend.
Oh yeah, that's big.
So that's going to be important. So they buy one of those. They buy a sea mine, a bomber, 5 more supply, 2 artillery, a guy, and another Sherman tank.
An American bomber, my favorite piece in the game.
And there it is. I knew you'd like that. They put the sea mine into the Algiers convoy zone. They deploy the tank immediately into Oran, as advertised. This is what's left over to deploy in Phase 6. All right. Do they have any combat? They do not. So we move into non-combat. The tanks, the French tanks, do have coast road movement. Okay, they only move 1, but they also have the coast road movement. So they were able to move from Oran, both tanks, from Oran to Constantine.
Now, the coast road movement, they can only go 2 spaces. Like, they could not have gone into Tunis, right?
No, because the coast road is only for non-combat.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Same thing with like the trucks. You can't ride a truck into combat. They move one of the guys from Algiers into Constantine to stay with the tanks, and then they move the stack up from Oran into Algiers. And now from Casablanca, they've got 2 trucks back there and a bunch of stuff that needs to get to the front. Well, the first one has 6 supply in it, which is its max capacity. The next one has 4 infantry and artillery and the French infantry unit. Okay. Unfortunately, this is going to leave 2 guys and a supply behind. They move all. Now, notice that the coast road goes through Spanish Morocco.
Yeah.
Spanish Morocco is impassable, so they only have the 2 movements of the truck to get from Casablanca through Fez into Oran. So this is as far as they can go. They can't get all the way to Constantine. And now the guys in Casablanca have got to walk.
Can they carry that supply with them? I don't remember.
They cannot. I did ask about that. Like, can one, like, maybe you can have 2 infantry carry 1 supply? Like, backpacks? I don't know. But no, right. They cannot. The destroyer moves out of Casablanca convoy zone and into Sea Zone 6 to join the Algiers convoy zone. Because now there's no reason to deploy in the Casablanca convoy zone, right? So now you don't have to worry about that big surprise move from the Germans anymore because they're not right up on you, sitting on your 6, as they say. So in the end, they've got a full Algiers. That's its max capacity. Important to remember that. They got 7 guys in Oran. So there's space in Oran. Algiers is full. Notice that the UK guy earlier moved out of Algiers and into Lagouat, however you say that.
Yeah.
So he's not there anymore. So now they deploy everything into the Algiers convoy zone.
Okay. Like it.
Right? So they've got the bomber there. They've got all the land units there. And on the next turn, they're going to try to advance into Algiers.
Now, if Algiers gets taken, they can't go there, though, right?
If Algiers gets taken, what would happen is the units would stay in the Algiers convoy zone until their advanced convoy phase of the Americans' turn. And then they would go back to the reinforcement zone to be deployed again to someplace else in phase 6.
So I might have put these guys in the Oran convoy zone. Again, not knowing all the math on these units, I'm just seeing 10 units versus 9 more powerful units. Though, I guess if Germany goes all in, it doesn't go very well, then the game's basically over. So maybe not. I'm kind of looking at it one-dimensionally. Just scares me trying to land in Algiers if you can't land in Algiers.
Right. You also can't land in Algiers if it's full.
Yeah, that's true.
Something else to keep in mind. But the supplies will always move. The fighters and the bombers have to find a safe place to land within 2 spaces or they crash. If they can't find it, they die.
Yeah. I think that was a bad play right there.
It is a little tricky. It does get a little, it gets a little sticky, that's for sure. And that is the end of the Americans' turn. On to the Germans. The Germans they've got 2 guys in Benghazi. They got a scout car in El Agheila, stacking the Kasserine Pass, and then 1 bomber left, and a bunch of sea mines. I think at this point they might have all of their sea mines deployed. The Axis only have 9, so they might all be out. I'm not sure. They got a lot. They purchased 3 subs again, but this time they decided to go with 6 infantry and a supply. They deploy their subs in step 2 as normal into Sea Zone 1. Again, this is the only place that these can go. This is the rest that's going to need to go out in phase 6, just the 6 infantry and the supply. Now for their combat move, as the subs move through Sea Zone 3, the UK gets the opportunity to detonate this mine. And they decide to do so, and they hit.
Man.
So that takes them down to 2 subs. And now they have to continue. They can't end the movement here.
Okay.
Right? They've got to continue to move because they have to end because they started. They have to end the combat move in attack position. And for sea units is in the same sea zone with enemy units.
Yep.
So they have to continue. So they move on to Sea Zone 6, and there's a mine there. Do the Americans want to detonate that mine? I think they do. And they hit again.
Gosh. This is brutal.
It really is.
They're 4 for 4 on mines against the German wolf pack.
It's so sick. Yes, they are. So that got destroyed. So now they're down to 1 sub against a battleship, a destroyer, a fighter, and a bomber. The mine is removed. So what other combat moves do they have? They send the bomber out to try to take out that one supply that's in the multi-convoy zone. And they also declare an attack with the 8 units that are in the Kasserine Pass, which is going to take 2 supplies to attack with, to provide supplies for. They pulled them from Tunis. Normally, the way the rules say is you should only put 1 arrow down here. I find it's easier to put as many as is required so that you can see that it's actually been paid for.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see that it's been paid for properly. Right. If you just put 1 there, I don't know whether or not I spent 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever it is. But if I know that I've used all of the supplies in the space as the attack arrow, then I could feel confident that I did it correctly. But you can do it however you want, of course. This is not what the rulebook says, but I think this makes it a little bit clearer for everybody to see what's happening. So it costs 2 supplies to attack with 8 units from the Kasserine Pass into Algiers. So how did they do? The Germans were successful. They did hit that supply in the multi-convoy zone, which is good. They took a swing and a miss with their lone sub in the Algiers convoy zone, so that was a bit of a drag. Here, the Allies did elect to defend, but they didn't hit anything. The Germans didn't hit anything. With all of those units, they missed everything. The Allies did not. So on the return fire, they hit 2 of the infantry that were there with the French and the American infantry that were there. So in the end, the Allies lost 1 supply because they had to, they lost the one that was in the multi-convoy zone. Plus they had to spend 1 to defend. But the Germans spent 2 supplies to attack from the Kasserine Pass, but they lost 2 infantry and all 3 subs. Again,
wow,
not a great round of combat for the Axis.
I feel like the Allies have cracked the Enigma code and know exactly where the subs are and what they're doing.
That's absolutely what it seems like. They've just been getting brutalized out there. All right, non-combat. The 2 anti-tank guns evacuate Benghazi and move into Mersa The scout car in El Agheila hightails it back to Tunis. I'm not sure why, but it's fun to see them go real far, real fast. The bomber comes out of the multi-convoy zone, lands back in Tunis. And of course, everybody that's in the Kasserine Pass has done combat, so they can't go anywhere. Now it's time to place their units. They've got their 6 infantry and their 1 supply, and they all go into the Tunis convoy zone. So now the Tunis convoy zone has 7 Italians, 6 German, all infantry, and 1 supply token, all defended by 3 mines. What can get there? Well, 2 battleships, a destroyer, a sub, and a fighter. So that's where the Germans ended up. Time for UK advancing of the convoy zones. We've got the fighter in Algiers. That's the only thing here that's got to advance. So it will come up. It can't land in Algiers because Algiers is full. So it's got to land in Oran. They come up from the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal convoy zone, starting that long trek. They do still have the 1 supply in Malta. This was an anomaly. They had the Malta supply token, but they forgot, and they did not spend it.
Okay.
I don't know why, but they didn't do it. So now they've got 29 RPs. So this is what they got. They bought 2 destroyers for 16, the fighter for 20 to take them to 26, and then a sea mine and a landmine. So they only spent the 29. They put the sea mine in their lucky Sea Zone 6. Because Lagahout has a UK infantry unit in it, or has a combat unit in it, they can place landmines here. So they put the one on the border between Lagahout and the Kasserine Pass to stop, I suppose, a flanking or to prevent a flanking, or just the attempt to pick off the only UK guy left on that side of the map, which by itself might be worth it. Because again, like all the other Axis and Allies games out there, you have to have a land unit in order to capture a territory. Yeah. So if you eliminate all of the land units of a single power, that power can no longer take control of a territory, which is a really, really important thing to be able to do. So these are the units that'll be placed in Phase 6. Now on to combat. What do they want to do here? They've got 2 convoy zones that have units in it. They've got the 5 supply token. Something that should have happened on the Germans' turn that I forgot to do is this 5 supply token that belonged to the Germans should have advanced on the Germans' turn. So this 5 supply token is not in the Tripoli convoy zone anymore. It's in Tripoli. So when we look at the UK combat moves, it looks like they're going to make a run at Mersa Brega. They're going to send in a stack from Bur Hashim, as well as the 2 Shermans blitzing through Benghazi to make our first flanking attack of the game, because they're the smaller of the 2 attacking forces. They get that 8+ reroll ability. You can see that in the supply token that gets flipped over, the attack arrow rather, that gets flipped over and sent next to them. Out to the Mediterranean, we've got the battleship in the Algiers convoy zone and the battleship and the rest of its fleet down in the Tunis convoy zone, and they both want to attack C-Zone 8 and all of those lonely transports in the Tunis convoy zone. So first, everyone's got to move until they get into an attack position or engage with a mine, and those 2 things are going to happen at the same time here. So the battleship moves in from Algiers over to the Tunis convoy zone, and the fleet moves up from 13 into 12 in the Malta convoy zone, and there are Axis mines in both territories. So now the Axis player gets to decide which of those mines they want to detonate and in what order. So they decide to blow all 3 mines in the Tunis convoy zone, and they miss with all 3 of them, because that's what they do.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So now there's no more mines in the Tunis convoy zone. They do get a hit when they blow up the 2 mines in the Malta convoy zone. So they get 1 hit, and that they decide to take on the destroyer. So they remove the destroyer from play. Now you still have units that are not in their attack position.
Yeah, so they have to move on until they're in that C zone up there.
Exactly right. So now if they wanted to, if C-Zone 11 had a C unit in it, they could have continued on to there, so long as they end in an attack position attacking an enemy unit. Or if they'd run into another C mine along the way, they would engage that C mine, and then that process would continue until they either were destroyed by however many C mines they could run into, or they ended up in an attack position, which is where they are now.
Yeah.
So now to conduct combat. The Axis players opted not to try to defend Mersa Brega, so they did not spend any supply tokens for this, and they tried to get into Eligela, but they didn't make it. Everybody, they got 3 hits. Out of all of those units, they got 3 hits. And because they were retreating, they didn't get any return fire, so that means that we're going to move in 8 of the units, so they left 1 infantry back in Bur Hashem. It will not be able to make a non-combat movement because it's been involved in combat, but now Mersa Brega has 8 land units in it. And they've taken control of Benghazi, which incidentally closed the Benghazi convoy zone.
I think it's curious that they took in their 2 heavy hitter tanks. I think I would have left a Sherman in Benghazi and put another infantry forward. It just seems like, well, I guess, yeah, I don't know. That's my initial thought, because you could get counterattacked and you have 1 infantry and then 5 of your tanks there on the very front line. But maybe there's not a high chance of getting counterattacked because they would run out of supply, not be able to defend, and you do have a second wave coming. I don't know, maybe they're trying to get them to attack them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun options there. So yeah, that's a good thought. So how did it go? These poor naked transports. Ouch.
Oh.
So all told, they lost 5 Italian infantry, 3 German infantry, and 2 anti-tank guns that were lost in Mersa Brega earlier. So here they're down to 3 German infantry and 2 Italian infantry that were able to escape at the end of each round of just being shelled by the 2 battleships and the sub. And they also lost that supply token that was there. All right, so now for UK non-combat. The truck in Bur Hashim drove back to Cairo.
Can you go to Cairo, pick stuff up, and then come back out?
Because it didn't start on the coast road, it only had 2 moves this turn.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so it went Mersa Matruh and then Cairo, and that was the end of its movement this turn. The Matildas move into Benghazi, and then we're going to use the trucks here. And the truck that's in Tobruk loads up the 2 infantry, the artillery, moves south to Bur Hashim, picks up the 2 supplies that are there, and then moves into Halo. So they're creating a southern route here. You can only get 8 guys into Mersa Brega, so this is the only way to get a stack past this kind of bottleneck.
Yeah.
So, and the truck will help, right? So like if you can clear Zella, then you can use the truck to move 2 spaces. It's not on the coast road, so it can't move the 5, but it can move 2, which is more than your guys can move. The air units come from Cairo. They land in Tobruk. Time for deployment. They've got the 2 destroyers and the fighter. And then the fighter goes into the Algiers convoy zone to support the efforts there. Now, there's also a fighter in Oran that gets assigned as a convoy escort into the Algiers convoy zone. It is time for Italy to take over. They've got 23. So they advanced their convoys. The 2 lucky infantry that survived the bombardment in the Tunis convoy zone moved into Tunis. They buy another stack of guys to go with the stack that's already at the bottom of the med. So they end up with 8 infantry, 2 sea mines, and a landmine. They place the sea mines in the Malta convoy zone and the Tripoli convoy zone. And they do put a mine in between El Wadid and Mareth. And they'll look to place their 8 guys at some point in the future. Next up, do they have any combat moves? No. So they've got no combat. They're not going to attack anybody. And the first non-combat move is to use the coast guard ability of these tanks to cruise all the way up to Tunis. And they brought the scout car with them.
Okay.
So if they had any offensive capability on the Eastern Front, it is now in Tunis. Next, they moved a guy into Zella, I guess to be a blocker. And then they left 2 guys in El Agheila, loaded everybody else on the truck, 2 guys in artillery and the 3 supply, and moved them all to Mareth.
Okay.
So, and then the stack in Sirta moved back to Tripoli. They laid out some blockers there. Not sure why they left 2 in El Agheila, but they did. So there's 2 guys in El Agheila, a guy in Zella, no supplies anywhere in range.
Yeah.
So when these guys get attacked, they're going to try to retreat, but there's going to be a wall of Union Jacks crashing down on them, so they probably will not survive. But there's a pretty healthy stack in Tripoli with plenty of supply.
And presumably more reinforcements on the way.
Hopefully, yes. The guys that have been purchased.
The victory conditions are the Axis have to hang on to at least 3 of their cities. So Tunis, Mareth, Tripoli, and the Kasserine Pass. Those are 4 cities. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So they lost Tobruk, Benghazi, El Agheila. That's 3. If they lose 1 more, that's the game. Mm-hmm. That's all their non-combat. They've got 5 supply in Mareth, 9 supply in Tripoli, and 5 supply in Tunis. So they're pretty well supplied at this point, at least it seems like, except for the guys in El Agheila who are just been left to their doom, as they would say. All right, time to place their new units. They sent them all to Tripoli, to the Tripoli convoy zone. So they're hoping that the UK's got something better to do that day. That is the end of the Italians' turn. We are on to the Americans. They've got 40 reinforcement points to spend. But before they can do that, they've got to advance their convoys. So the first thing they got to do is get this bomber out of here. So they send the bomber to Oran, which takes Oran to 8 units now in Oran. Algiers is still at 10.
Because the Germans can't hit anything.
Exactly right. And actually, while they were playing, like they got to this point in the game and the American player looked up at the Germans and said, "You were supposed to hit things." So they had planned to lose units. Alas, not so much. So now what that means is that these units have to stay in the convoy zone. They do not advance. They do not get redeployed. They just stay there. So what do they buy? They buy another French tank, a sea mine. Both of those will go out immediately. They buy a fighter and 4 Sherman tanks. They're on the move, and they're feeling aggressive. They place the sea mine in the Algiers convoy zone, and the tank has to go into Oran, which takes that to 9 units in that space. These will have to go out later. Hopefully they'll have space. Any combat from the Americans? Let's see what they want to do. They send the bomber from Oran to the Tunis convoy zone to try to take a swipe at the German infantry that are there. And they are going to take a move at the Kasserine Pass. They take the Sherman from Oran, blitz it through Lagahout, and then they're going to make a flanking attack into the Kasserine Pass. They're also going to do the same thing with the infantry and the 2 French tanks from Constantine, and then they're going to send in all the guys from Algiers.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a big but expensive battle. So this costs them 4 supply tokens for each round of combat, if they want to keep everybody in. They don't have to keep everybody in, but if they want to, it's going to be that expensive.
What I'm thinking is if I'm America, is I'm going to take the destroyer in the Algiers convoy zone. I'm going to attack the Tripoli convoy zone, hoping to clear a path through the sea mines, detonating them, opening it up for the British, or if not, just getting some shots off on those Italian guys in Tripoli if they want to not detonate their mines.
Yeah, I think I would have engaged that destroyer. You're absolutely right. Now they've made their attack declaration. They've paid their supplies for it. Now the Germans get to decide whether or not they want to defend or they want to try to book it out of there and give the Allies a free shot at them as they're running away. But at least they'd have a reasonable chance of survival. But they do decide to stick it out, at least for one round. And it did not go great for them. But what it did do, though, is this combat went on for several rounds. And so the Allies end up spending 14 supply on this battle. Now, they only lost 4 American infantry, 2 French infantry, compared to the Axis losing a mech, 2 artillery, the anti-tank gun, and then the 2 tanks, plus 5 of their supply. So this battle went on for a long time and was really expensive for both sides. This is just the Kasserine Pass battle.
Wow.
So next up, we've got the swipe at the Tunis convoy. How did they do? They got 1. But so when you put all that together, it is a mess. It is all bad. Americans non-combat. They can't move the guy in Algiers, but they can load up the truck in Oran, pick up all of the guys that are there. Oh, first, the French truck will use its coast road ability and move to Constantine. And then they'll use one of the trucks to load up the remainder of the units in Oran and move them right along into Constantine. They'll take the second truck in Oran, move into Algiers, pick up the 4 supplies that are there, move those into Constantine. The bomber also landed in Malta, and the guys from Casablanca finally decided to join the party and started heading east. They're in Fez now. Hopefully they'll be able to get into the action before the game winds down. Reinforcements, you've got the 4 Shermans and the fighter. Those are all going to go into the Algiers convoy zone to join the party there. That puts a lot of guys in Algiers, so hopefully when the Americans' turn comes around, there'll be enough space in Algiers to be able to actually advance the units there. Takes us over to Germany 10. They don't control the Kasserine Pass. That should be a U.S. marker there in the Kasserine Pass. Again, I beg your indulgence. There's a lot of pieces to move around on this board. They've 35 reinforcement points to work with. First, they've got to advance their convoys. The 2 lucky guys have survived 2 shellings now, from one from the UK, the other from the Americans. They advance into Tunis. With their big dollars, they purchase a guy, a truck, a supply, 4 tanks, 2 sea mines, and a landmine. They placed the sea mines in the Malta convoy zone and the Tripoli convoy zone. The landmine they placed between Tunis and Constantine. Again, that should be a U.S. marker there in the Kasserine Pass. Do the Germans have any combat moves? They do. They're going to send the Stutka bomber from Tunis. They're going to go after the American bomber and the supply token that is there. They killed the American bomber, but forgot about the collateral damage ability.
Oh.
And the collateral damage ability is a may, because there are instances where you wouldn't want to destroy the supply because you're about to take over the territory. You want that supply to be there. So the collateral damage ability is a may. So they did not remove this supply. They remembered it later, but they didn't remember it at the time. So that supply ended up staying there.
That's a tough break.
Yeah, for sure. So they deploy everything this time into the Tripoli convoy zone. So they've got 4 tanks, a truck, a guy, a supply, and then the 8 Italian infantry there, with hopes of being defended again by the 2 sea mines that are there. It's a bold move, Cotton. We'll see how it works out for them. Any questions about the Germans?
Would the German, you take the flags out of the convoy zone if they lose control of the land the convoy zone goes to, right? So the Tunis convoy still has the German and Italian flag in it, not because they control the sea zone, but because they control Tunis. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they control that convoy zone. They control the Tripoli convoy zone, but they don't control the Benghazi convoy zone because the UK is in control of that convoy zone. Now, It's important to remember that the Benghazi convoy zone is just closed at this point. The UK can't use it. It's just closed to the Axis. So yeah, so that's the end of the Germans' turn. Over to the Brits. They've got a lot of money this time. First, they've got to advance their convoys from the Suez Canal. Those guys move into Cairo. And the two fighters that are in the Algiers convoy zone, they move into and land in Algiers. I don't think they're going to stay there, though. They have 48 reinforcement points here. So, yeah, so they buy 2 bombers, a fighter, a truck, 5 supplies, a sea mine, and a destroyer. So this is a lot for this game, for sure. I forgot to remove the supply token in Malta. My apologies. But there are no sea units in the Tripoli convoy zone. So the UK can place a sea mine there, which is what they did. They put a sea mine in the Tripoli convoy zone. This is everything else that's going to have to go out later. Time for their combat moves. They've got all of these pieces on the Eastern Front with a couple of speed bumps in the way. They decide to attack the Tripoli convoy zone with the bomber from Tobruk, because now it can land in the Kasserine Pass or in Malta, either way. And again, that supply token is not in Malta. My mistake. The UK sea units have moved from 8 into 12, but there are Axis sea mines there, so they have to pause and give them an opportunity to detonate them, which they do, and they both miss, which allows them to carry on and move into Sea Zone 13 with the Tripoli convoy zone and all of the juicy undefended transports that are there. Other combat moves, before we deal with the sea mines in the Tripoli convoy zone, we've got other combat moves that have to be declared. They're sending 5 units from Mersa Brega at the guys in El Agheila and 5 guys in Hello into Zela, which is only going to cost them 1 supply token each, thankfully, because that's all that are currently in range for them. And that empties Bur Hashem. But because the guys in El Agheila and Zela do not have access to any supply tokens of their own, they must retreat, and they get killed. They get shot in the back on the way out of dodge. That allows the rest of the units to move in, and everything else over there is a non-combat move. Time to conduct combat here in Sea Zone 13. First up, the Axis try to detonate their mines and do some damage, but again, they miss with their sea mines.
I think they bought these sea mines from the Russians, and they were all fake.
I think you might be right. I think that might be a thing. Because this was statistically highly improbable that they would miss this many times.
And the Allies hit with like every one of theirs.
I know. It was pretty brutal. So they missed with those. We removed them from play, and this was the result. It's a lot. So yeah, they lost.
Oh my gosh, the poor Axis.
7 Italian infantry, 1 German infantry, the truck, and then 2 of the German tanks, and of course the supply that's there, which leaves 4 infantry and 2 tanks to advance from Tripoli convoy zone into Tripoli on their respective turns. This, of course, assumes the Americans don't have anything to say about it. All right, so now we look at the non-combat move for the UK here. The 2 fighters that were in Algiers flew out to Malta to meet the bomber that was coming in from Tripoli. So all those air units landed out there in Malta. Then they moved 1 of the supply tokens from Gibraltar out to Malta. Then they moved the 2 destroyers from Sea Zone 3 into Sea Zone 12. I feel like they missed some opportunities here, but what they did do is they consolidated in El Agheila. They moved a bunch of guys forward to Mersa Brega. The truck from Cairo picked up 6 supplies and headed all the way out to El Agheila, using the full length of its Coast Guard ability, which is pretty cool. The truck that was in Halo moved up to Tobruk. So now it's time to place the rest of the units. They get the 2 bombers, the fighter, and the destroyer. The destroyer goes in 3 to prevent any sneaky German subs from making their way back into the Mediterranean. And everything else goes into the Algiers convoy zone. And that is where we end the UK's turn. I think it'll be very hard for the Axis to mount any kind of comeback. At this point, they're just trying to hang on, right? They're just trying to like get to where if they can be holding the Kasserine Pass and Tripoli and Merith and Tunis, they can still win this game, right? But it's a question of whether or not they can manage that. And the UK or the Allies have made a little bit of a tactical error here in that they don't have a lot of supplies in the right places to do what they need to do. Okay, so as we start the Italians' turn, we can get all of their pieces into one picture. So the first thing they've got to do is, of course, is advance into Tripoli. They've got the 4 infantry left. There are 6 infantry there, so they've got enough space in Tripoli at least. So they got a full house in Tripoli right now, but it's all infantry. And remember, the Italian infantry only defended at 2, but they do have a lot of supply. So we'll see how that goes for them. Their purchase surprised me a bit this time. They bought 2 bombers and 2 landmines. I think they're looking to beef up the offensive capability to go with this infantry. So we'll see what they do with it. They placed one of the landmines on the border between Tunis and Constantine, and the other between Merith and the Kasserine Pass. Next, it is time for them to declare their combat. I liked how they did this. I will say that. They moved the scout car from Tunis into Merith, and it put the same number of units in Tunis as was attacking from Merith. So they've got 4 units attacking Kasserine Pass from Tunis. They've got 4 units attacking the Kasserine Pass from Merith. So they get to choose which is the flanking force.
Nice.
Right. So they're attacking with the 2 tanks and the 2 guys flanking, and the other guys are just attacking normally.
Yeah, that's a good move. I like it.
I thought this was a very good move. And the UK, or the Americans can, and the French units there, can pull their supplies from Constantine. So they can defend for up to 4 rounds. So they've got a couple of options here. But what they decide to do instead, and I thought this was pretty clever, is the Americans decide to retreat. But the Free French units are self-sufficient. They get to stay and defend. So the Italians spend 2 supplies to send their 8 guys in, and they roll, and they scored 2 hits. But the Americans didn't have to assign those hits to the Free French units that were there fighting. They could take them on the units that were retreating. So which means that the Free French units are still there. So if the Italians want to take this, they have to attack again and pay for the supplies again.
That makes sense. Now, do those French tanks still get to shoot yet, right?
Yes. This is where it got a little crazy for the Italians. This battle went on for a long time. So the Italians could not seem to hit anything. The Free French units kept hitting. Again, like the luck for the Axis here was just absolutely terrible. Like those Italian tanks are re-rolling on 8s and 9s and just missing. It's really not going their way. In the end, they finally do get the last of the French tanks, but they lost the scout car, they lost 3 infantry, and they spent 6 all day to win this. So they do win the Kasserine Pass. They enter with the guy and artillery and the 2 tanks because they're compelled to, because they have to enter because they've won the territory, which doesn't put them in the best spot.
Yep.
Right? Because the Americans are going to go next. So we'll see how that goes for them. Non-combat, they load up, they bring the truck from Merith over to Tripoli. They load up 4 infantry and 2 supply and move it into Tunis because they've got a stack of Shermans that are about to offload from the Algiers convoy zone into Algiers that could move through Constantine and attack Tunis directly and skip the Kasserine Pass altogether. So in the end, they also split 2 guys out from Tripoli and do block Sirte and Sokna. So this locks the UK out of even having a shot at Tripoli because they've made it pretty clear at this point that looking at the clock, they're only going to get 1 more round at most. So the UK is only going to have 1 more turn to be able to try to get anything here. So they basically are going to have to make sure that they get the Kasserine Pass or Merith or Tunis, or they're going to get to this point and lose. Can you imagine?
That'd be frustrating.
Right. The other thing that happened is they took 3 of the infantry out of Tripoli and moved them to Merith to prevent just a walk in there from the UK units. Time to deploy. They've got those 2 bombers, and they can land in Sardinia. That is the end of the Italians' turn. Looking a little bleak, but not completely hopeless. It just depends on how the Allies are able to kind of rally through here and get to the end of the show. On to the Americans' turn. It is time for them to advance their convoys, and mercifully, there is plenty of space in Algiers. They're able to advance everything. They move the fighter, the 5 Sherman tanks, 2 artillery, and the infantry into Algiers, but no supply. A note there it would have been nice there for the Americans to be coming in with some supplies. So they just try to rectify that by making a purchase of a bomber, 4 more Sherman tanks, 3 infantry, and the supply token. Time for combat. They are coming after the Kasserine Pass, but they've only got 4 supplies to do it with. So they've got to get this right on the first try or they're in trouble. Because in theory, a lot of those Italian infantry can move in there and try to bolster it later on. So they send 5 units from Constantine, including the French truck, 3 infantry, the artillery, and then 5 Shermans from Algiers. And again, because they're equal in number, the attacker gets to decide which is the flanking force. And of course, in this case, it's the Shermans. Okay, so remember, the Shermans attack at a 5. So the only 2 numbers that they're going to miss on is a 6 or a 7, because if they roll an 8, 9, or 10, they're going to re-roll it. So long as they don't roll a 6 or a 7, they're going to score a hit. So the thing is that they're going to need to score 4 hits or they're going to be out of supply entirely, which means that all the Germans have to do is attack and they'll be forced to retreat from the Kasserine Pass, except for the French, who will stay and defend. But this is not an enviable position to be in. We got another combat move here. The destroyer decided to come around and does attack these 2 tanks that are in Tripoli, but they miss. And the 2 tanks survive. That's going to be important later. Remember those 2 tanks in the Tripoli convoy zone. So now we've got the Kasserine Pass. How did they do? They were successful in taking out everything that was there. And they moved in. They lost 2 infantry, and spent 2 supply. The Italians, on the other hand, lost a guy and artillery, 2 tanks, and 1 supply, which they had to spend from Tunis. So now there's only 3 supply left in Tunis. So they moved the truck in from Constantine, along with a couple of other units, to get the Kasserine Pass up to the full 10. So they've only got 2 supplies, though, so they can't defend it for long if it comes under attack more than twice. So we'll see what happens next. The fighter moves back, lands in Algiers. The guy from Fez has finally made it to Oran, and the truck, the extra truck that was in Constantine, moves back to Oran to hopefully move those 2 guys forward if there is a need for future battle. They deploy everything into the Algiers convoy zone once again. That's 3 infantry, 4 more Shermans, and a bomber, and then a 5 supply token. In the end, this is what the Americans' position looks like. And then we're going to turn it over to the Germans and their 6 pieces on the board. Ouch. They do have some money to work with, but first we've got to advance the convoys. Those 2 tanks advance into Tripoli. They decide to build a stack again. 10 infantry, a sea mine, and a land mine. They drop the sea mine in the Tunis convoy zone. The land mine gets added to the other land mines that are between Tunis and Constantine. So those are the 10 infantry that are going to have to try to fend for themselves out in this shark-infested waters. Time for combat. The Kasserine Pass is under attack by all of the German forces. The scout car, and that's really important here. So the scout car and the bomber are attacking the Kasserine Pass. The tank moves through Mareth and is attacking the Kasserine Pass, along with the 2 infantry from Tunis. So the 2 infantry from Tunis need to spend 1 supply. The 2 tanks that came out of Tripoli need to spend 1 supply. But they can draw that supply from Tripoli. So the tanks draw the supply from Tripoli, but the guys from Tunis draw from Tunis. But the scout car doesn't require it, but in this case it doesn't much matter. But what's really important here is that the bomber and the scout car have the collateral damage and the supply raider ability respectively, both of which are going to destroy a supply, but not until after the Allies get to decide whether or not they're going to defend. So thinking about order of operation here, the Axis have paid for their supply. They've declared their attack and paid the supply. Okay. The next thing that has to happen is the defender has to decide whether or not they're going to defend. The Allies decide to defend and they spend 1 supply token. Then the collateral damage and supply raider abilities are applied. So in this case, there was only 1 supply left. So that last supply is destroyed.
This is pretty intense because if America isn't successful in this battle, it seems like they've put an overwhelming force together and they ran out of gas and food and water and ammo.
That's exactly right. So now they've got 6 units that are attacking. They've got 10 units firing back. So let's see what happened. All right. Both sides hit pretty much as expected. The Allies took 3 hits and delivered 5. So in this instance, though, now what happens? First, the tank, if they decide to continue the attack, which of course they will because they have to win here, when they choose to continue the attack, they keep the reroll 8+ ability, even though the entire other main force has been destroyed. So they do keep the flanking ability. So they remove the attack arrow from Tunis, and then they've got to spend another supply, which they take from Tripoli. So now they're attacking again. But now the Americans don't have any more supplies, so they must retreat.
Yeah.
Except for the French tank, which is self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So now the German tank fires, and it hits, but the Americans can assign that hit to one of the escaping units.
Oh, yeah.
So they take the artillery as the hit. So that gets removed. Now the French tank fires back and misses. Step 4, in the combat phase, we resolve retreats. So now the surviving Sherman tanks evacuate, leaving the American truck, by the way. So that has to stay because it can't retreat. But the Shermans escape to El Wadid and Constantine. Again, leaving the French tank still holding the territory, and the German tank now has to declare its attack again, spend another supply from Tripoli to run at him again. This time he rolls and he hits, but the French tank gets to fire back and it hits and destroys the German tank.
Oh my gosh. That's such an exciting ending to that battle.
Right?
Yeah, this game has come down to a couple of really unique situations, but I'm wondering if when a round or two ago when the Americans were seeing they had less supply, if they should have been building more of the French tanks, because they seem to be working out for them so well.
Well, you can only build one per turn.
Okay.
You can build one French infantry, you can build one French tank per turn. The other thing to remember here is that the Americans can buy 10 supply tokens per turn.
Yeah.
They never did that. That may be why they're running short at this point, because they underinvested in supply, but they're also really dominant with the Sherman tanks. Yeah. So maybe that's the trade-off for it, but this was like skin of their teeth holding on to the Kasserine Pass. And the Italians still have to go. So the UK is going to go next, and then the Italians have got to go. So we'll see how this plays out. So we remove that attack arrow. This is what the total losses were for this particular battle. Again, heavy in the material losses, but also now heavy for the supply losses for the Axis. Oh, at this point, this is the first time that's happened in this game. There are no German units anywhere on the map.
That's totally crazy.
And there's still a possibility the Axis can win. So next, they mobilize their 10 guys into the Tunis convoy zone in hopes of, them making it there. Seems unlikely, but I suppose it's possible. That is the end of the Germans' turn. Over to the UK. And this, they've got nothing to advance and on the Eastern Front. On the Western Front, they do have several things that need to move forward. Now, remember, air units have 2 moves to find a safe place to land. And Kasserine Pass meets that qualification. The Allies control it, and it's within 2 spaces of the Algiers convoy zone. So they're able to land all 3 of their air units there. So the next thing that happens is the truck and the supply tokens, the ever so important supply tokens, make it into play. And the supply token advanced from Malta into the Malta convoy zone, which they did then spend. And I remembered to remove from the map. They did spend it and ended up with a lot of money. 49 reinforcement points to spend, and they bought all of that, which is a lot. For anybody curious, these are the pieces that they had that were not in play. Remember, this game is limited to the number of pieces that come with the game. So it's worth mentioning here that there are no C units left. Every C unit that they had available to them is now is either in play or on its way into play. And you can never chip up C units or air units. You'll also notice that there are no fighters and bombers over here. So this is the easiest way to think about it, is this is the maximum UK build, but for sea and air at least. What's interesting though is that all of the scout cars have returned to the inventory, and all of the anti-tank guns have returned to the inventory. It'd be interesting to see if the use of those or the heavier use of those, particularly the scout cars, would have played a role in this game. I think they probably would have, because each one of those, every time you get attacked by a scout car, you lose a supply token.
Yeah.
And as you can see, that's a big deal. They placed the landmine in the border between El Wadid and Marith. Combat moves, they pulled a Doug Thorpe, is what they did.
I was literally sitting here thinking they should just go and blow all those Italians up with their airplanes.
I saw this and I was like, yeah, Doug's going to love this. Yeah.
I was thinking it for a little while here, so I approve.
Yes. Well, absolutely right. So the other thing to remember here is that, one, the bombers are going to have the collateral damage ability. And two, air units don't require supplies to attack. So they can fire at this round after round after round without spending any supplies. The same cannot be said for the defenders here. So, yeah, it's kind of messy for them. So they attack with all of this, and they decide to defend. I was a little surprised by that. So they decide to defend. They spend one of the supplies. The collateral damage ability spends the other supply. They've got 4 twos, and they all missed. The UK did not. They took them out pretty quickly. So they lost the 4 infantry and the 2 supplies that were in Tunis. The only thing left in Tunis now is the stolen British truck. So they're hoping I'm supposed to get that back. It was not a good day to be an Italian in Tunisia. They do make the combat move into Sirta and Sokna. Again, those guys try to retreat and get shot in the back for their trouble. But they did burn 2 supplies. But at this point, they're not going to be able to reach Tripoli before time expires. But Tunis has been emptied, and everything landed in the Kasserine Pass, because the Italians can still attack here. And they moved the one guy from El Wadid into the Kasserine Pass. But they moved the UK truck forward with the 5 supply tokens so that the Americans could attack from El Wadid into Marith. So now that there's supplies in the Kasserine Pass, they can get over to Marith.
They can hit Tunis and Marith.
So even if the Italians somehow miraculously take the Kasserine Pass, the Americans, in theory, should be able to step into either Tunis or Marith or both. They make their non-combat moves over here. They move as much forward as they can. It's time for their reinforcements to be deployed. They've got that big stack of whatnot. So they deploy all of this. C-Zone 3, Algiers Convoy Zone. And that is the end of the UK's turn, which takes us to the Italians for their Italy 11. They buy 2 fighters and 2 landmines. They put 1 landmine on the Tripoli-Sirta border and the other on the Kasserine Pass and Marith border. And they've really only got one choice. They've got the 3 infantry and the 2 bombers coming from Sardinia. They've only got the 1 supply token left in Tripoli. So they've got to get 5 hits. And it's at this point that they all looked around at each other and thought, wait, there's 6 units there. Because they can't attack a second time. They can only attack once. So this is when they realized no matter what happens in the rolls here, they're not going to be able to take the Kasserine Pass this turn, because there are more units there than are attacking. So even if they rolled perfect, which the Axis has not done once in this game,
yeah,
even if they had, they wouldn't be able to get into the Kasserine Pass because they only have 1 supply token left. But they spend it anyway, and they roll, and the Americans decide, or the UK decides to spend the supply to defend. They lost the bomber, 2 supplies, and because the collateral damage ability from the Italian bombers. So, but they did lose the 3 infantry and the bomber and the 1 supply token that they had to spend. And that was how it ended up. That was the end of the game. The 3 guys in Tripoli, they moved to Marith because and then the 2 fighters landed in the Tunis convoy zone. So as we look across the entirety of the mayhem, any thoughts about how all this came together?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting game. It seems like, I mean, it's technically a win from the Allies, but I mean, America could still take Tunis and Marith, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And so, like, it wasn't just a victory; it was kind of total domination, sea domination. Like, I mean, air, they have total control of the air. Like, that's just, there's 3 Axis units in North Africa, and the name of the game is North Africa. Not a good sign.
Yeah, this was a pretty dominant game for the Allies, and a couple of things to keep in mind here. Again, everyone was just learning this game.
Yeah.
They're still experimenting with the tournament rules to make sure that they are balanced so that they make sense to try to create a 4-hour version of this game. I'm not sure that they've got that dialed in yet. I think that there's a lot of, and of course, because everyone's still learning it, like the bid of 14 was huge. Like,
Yeah.
think about where that bid led. Like, it led to an extra unit in Iran. It led to the AA gun that shot down the bomber, the destroyer that came in and helped clear out, the Tripoli convoy zone. Some things that the Axis could have done differently would have been to try to deploy to the Benghazi convoy zone in their first turn with a couple of fighters and some guys and maybe a supply token, which would have at least given them a chance to push the pressure back against the UK on the Eastern Front. Obviously, trying to defend the convoy zones rather than just overstack them would have been a more effective strategy. But once the
Yeah.
Allies get rolling here, like in any Axis and Allies game, once the Allies get rolling, it's pretty hard to turn it around.
I think one of the biggest factors in this game was the sea mines. I mean, I don't know the exact stats, but I think the Axis sea mines hit 1 or 2 times, and the Allies hit like 4 to 6
Seven.
times or 7.
7 times.
Like, yeah, like that's pretty swingy. Because Germany spent 2 rounds building 3 subs each round, and just, I mean, it was just like throwing money out the window.
Yeah, they got crushed.
So,
Yeah, so that's pretty hard to come back from. I mean, I think that they were part of it is that, of course, again, everybody's still learning, but they were also trying to play the tournament rules, which is something you and I know quite a bit about. Is trying to you're not
yeah,
just playing to the rules of the game, you're also playing to how to win in this particular tournament situation. So,
exactly.
they were trying to hold enough cities and trying to juggle, which is why they were completely content to let the East collapse
Yeah.
and with their goal of holding on to, Kasserine, Tunis, Marath, and Tripoli for the win.
What's interesting about that is, like, from one perspective, that strategy kind of worked, right? Like, they didn't lose Tripoli. They held there. They pulled back from Benghazi all the way to Tripoli. It's just things fell apart from them everywhere else, like in all those sea battles, the landmines, in the West as well.
The Allies were beatable here, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was a couple of instances where, like, if they'd had a scout car where they needed it to be, or they had to use the bomber in a different way, or there were ways that the Allies could have been beaten here. Now it's again, they had some pretty rough luck. There's no doubt about that. But looking at it now with 2020 hindsight and a full understanding of the rules, we're able to look at this and think about like all of the different little nitpicky special abilities that they, were just trying to grasp, and constantly asking questions. I mean, I watched the replay video and like, even at this point in the game, they were asking questions about how does this thing work or how does that thing work? Because it's complicated, right? There's just a lot of phases and steps and sequences to underneath that. And so, I mean, it's a deep game. But I think once everyone kind of gets their brain around all of the intricacies of the rules, I think people are going to really, really enjoy this game. So,
Yeah, it brings to life some ideas that I've heard, like, this idea of landmines, some sort of supply, like keeping your troops supplied in some way. Like, it really brings some of those concepts to life in a way that's kind of all in one game. So it is a lot. It's a lot to consume. I mean, I would have been very perplexed if I were playing in this tournament, this early in the life of the game. So yeah, I think both sides did well, given.
No, no, absolutely. Oh, and I found out that one of the Axis players was actually playing in one of the other Axis and Allies finals. So he was playing in 2 games at the same time. So
Yeah.
this partially accounts for why it was taking so long, for why the Axis took as long as they did, because one of their players had a split brain, which is something I'm sure you know nothing about, right?
More than one occasion, that's rough.
Yes, yes, yes. So, well, awesome. Well, I think we've covered this game. I'm excited about it. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of explore this with us. Again, everybody's still learning this game, and we welcome comments. And if you've got another way that this could have been played, we'd love to hear about it. If anyone has come up with a battle calculator for this game, I would be very interested to see what that looks like and how that works. With all of the intricacies here, I'm not sure how that's going to come together, but I would love to see somebody's attempt at it. Doug, anything else you want to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, Gary. It was a lot of fun watching you talk through it and learning a lot about the game. So
I promise in future videos I will not talk nearly as much because Doug will know more about these future games than I know about those. So I appreciate your indulgence and sticking with me through the story of it.
yeah, it was fun, man. Thanks a lot.
If you've enjoyed this video, now's a great time to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a citizen of Board Game Nation by clicking the join button below to gain access to our exclusive content and giveaways. Thank you to Matt Hyra for helping to host this game that fateful Sunday morning at Gen Con. It made a big difference. When our next championship board game video is ready, it'll be right here. For all of our championship videos, check out this playlist in this general vicinity. For our latest bit of mayhem, right this way. And if you're ready for more from Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.